Peace Queen. It's Melissa Crawford of thequeencode.com. And my message today is actually part 3 and the final part of Sankofa, the power of your past. You know, Sankofa is really all about honoring your past because the past informs us. And so many times, if you want to move forward in a very powerful way, you have to go back from where you came. So the concept of Sankofa comes out of the Akan culture in Ghana, West Africa. And it literally means to go back and get it, to seek, to claim, to return. And it's often associated with the African proverb, it is not wrong to go back and claim that which you have forgotten. So in part 1 of this message, we talked about going back to your childhood, going back to that place where, you know, as children, we intuitively know who we are, and it's showing up in our actions and it's showing up in the things that we're naturally drawn to. So going back to that place before society started telling you who you can and cannot be and what's possible and you know, that's impossible, going back to that place of and really connecting the dots about what you're naturally drawn to. That's what we talked about in part 1. In part 2, we talked about the pains of your past. We talked about going back there and really beginning to face those things, because until we do, until we go back and get the lesson from the pain and then release the pain, we cannot rightfully reign as queen. So in part 3, I actually want to go even deeper. I want to go back even further than your past, further than your childhood, even further than your lifetime. In part 3, I want to go back to your ancestral history. You know, as I look back in my own life and I begin to connect the dots in my own life, I know for a fact that one of the major game changers for me was when I began to learn about who I was as an African American woman. You know, in school, I loved history, and it was always my favorite subject because I always liked to know, how did this, you know, come to be? What's the origin of this? How did this start? And like I shared with you in part 1 of this message, it's at the root of something where all the power is, the power to create or the power to destroy. So I've always had a love for history, but when I went off to college in my freshman year, I joined this organization, and for Black History Month, we invited a local West African dance group in to perform. And so at the performance, I'm watching the dancers dance, and they're so dynamic, and being a dancer myself, I could appreciate the art of it. And I'm hearing the beat of the drums, and even though I was very moved by the performance, there was something else that was, it really struck a chord in me, something that I couldn't explain. And I remember saying to myself, I would love to do something like that. Well, a week later, I actually got an opportunity to actually join that group. And of course I did. And it was when I joined that group that I began to develop this desire to know more about my African heritage. Because from what we were taught in school, or at least where I'm from, it was, you know, savages in Africa with loincloths and slaves in America and emancipation and then, you know, the civil rights movement, and that's basically it. And so what I began to do was I began to go back even further. And what I learned literally changed my life. As I began to go back, as far back really as human civilization, and learn that human civilization actually started in East Africa, I began to also do research on great civilizations like ancient Egypt and Timbuktu, and I learned that not only did I not come from savages in Africa, but that I had a wonderful legacy of greatness. I found these ancient kingdoms that were leaders in civilization, that were leaders in math and science and education and, you know, all of these great things, all these great inventions. And then I found the queens. I found these wonderful, powerful women, ancient women in Africa that reigned over these vast kingdoms, you know, and I even shared some of these in some of my earlier videos. Women like Queen Makeda of Ethiopia, Queen Tai of Nubia and ancient Egypt, Nefertiti, all of these wonderful women whose lives actually reflected my inner vision. See, growing up, And the way I grew up, like I shared with you in part one, I had this huge inner vision, something telling me that I could be, do, and have anything I desire, that life was bigger. But my surroundings didn't reflect the inner vision. So here I am, learning about these women that lived 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years ago, whose lives reflect who I thought I was. And that really made a huge impression on me, because all of a sudden I didn't feel crazy. Even though I was far removed from these women, like I said, some 6,000 years, I understood that it was still a part of my cultural DNA for me to feel like I'm queen. And so it really helped me, especially, being a freshman in college. I'm 18, 19 years old. I'm trying to figure out who I am in the world. It really helped me to understand who I was. And it really gave me a different outlook on things. There's this ancient Egyptian proverb that says, to understand the new, we must first become versed in the old. To understand the new, we must first become versed in the old. And so here I am trying to understand little old me, and going back really helped me to do that. And not only did it help me to understand who I was in the present, but it gave me a different vision of who I should be in the future, or where I should be going. One of my favorite movies is the Saga by Alex Haley. And if you've ever seen the movie, you know what it's about. There's this, it's really a story of the family lineage of this African-born man by the name of Kunta Kinte. So when the movie starts out, it shows how he's captured in Africa by slave traders, taken away from his beautiful family, and shipped to America. And so in America, even though he's enslaved and he's in chains, Kunta Kinte, number one, never forgets his real name. He never forgets his language. He never forgets his culture. And not only does he remember all of those things, but he teaches it to his daughter Kizzy, and Kizzy teaches it to her son Chicken George, and so on and so forth. And so there's a part in this movie where Kizzy, who's now an adult, and she has an adult son, she meets this another slave from another plantation, and they fall in love and they want to get married. Well, it's a good situation for Kizzy, because the man she wants to marry is a house slave, and she's a field slave. So in marrying him, she gets to move to a better plantation, she gets better clothes, better food, better housing, all of this. And so everything seems so, perfect for her in her situation. She's about to, go to a better place. But then the night before she's supposed to leave with her fiance, Sam does something that really shows Kizzy who he really is. And she decides, I can't go with you. I know it will mean better things for me, but I cannot go with you. And so the next day she watches him as he rides off with his master. And her son, Chicken George, comes up to her and says, Mama, I thought you were going to marry Sam. What happened? And what she said was so powerful. She said, Sam wasn't like us. No one ever told him where he came from, so he had no dream about where he should be going. Sam wasn't like us. No one ever told him where he came from, so he had no dream about where he should be going. And that's what happened for me when I began to learn my ancestral history, who I was. It gave me a brighter vision about where I should be going. It made me walk a little taller. It raised the bar in education and so many other ways, because I understood the lineage and the legacy of greatness that I had. And so, really, Queen, it doesn't matter if you have an African heritage like me. You may have an Asian heritage, a European heritage, Native American. You may be a Latina queen. Whatever it is, you ought to know your roots, because God is a God of purpose. You're here as you are at this time for a reason, and everything that he does means something. So it's honorable for you to go back and understand who you are on a cultural level. Go back and understand the great achievements of your culture. I also understand other cultures, so I look at great cultures like in the Asian culture and in European culture, places like Rome. It's like, go back and understand where you came from, but not only the high achievements, but also understand the falls, because our ancestors also left great lessons in their failures that we can go back and take and bring with us now. I'll share with you one that's been very powerful for me. You know, as I look at great civilizations, whether they're in Africa or any other place in the world, the ones that fell, the one thing that you see at the root of it all is getting away from fundamentals. And so what that tells me is, Melisi, as you're building your queendom, never get away from your foundation. Never get away from fundamentals. Or like my grandmother would always say, always keep God first. And so I'm sharing that with you. That's a lesson that I've learned from our ancestors. So again, we all have this beautiful heritage. And it really helped me to know that, you know, growing up, I was taught to believe that the dark skin was not beautiful, that the hair was not beautiful. But I learned that there were women way back in ancient times that looked just like me, that were considered to be the standard of beauty. And so that really uplifted me. And again, no matter your color, race, creed, or anything, we all have those beautiful stories that we can go back and claim. So that's what I began to do. But here's the other thing. I also, you know, about 5 years ago, I also began to go back even further and even deeper than that. When you think about a bow and arrow, right? You have the bow, you have the arrow. If you put the arrow in that bow and you pull back just a little bit, what's going to happen? Maybe the arrow shoots forth just a little bit. But if you pull back as far as you can go till you can't go anymore, what's going to happen? That arrow is going to shoot forth with a lot of power. And so about 5 years ago, I began to go back even further than who I was as an African American woman. I began to go back to who I was on a soul level. You know, when you think about it, we're all here for a reason. We all have a mission. And I began to understand that the mission that I have was encoded inside of me even before birth. The mission that you have, Queen, was encoded inside of you even before birth. And so I wanted to understand why I was here. You know, what's my mission? What's my purpose? And when I thought about it, I remembered that when I was young, my grandmother used to recite the Our Father prayer with us. And when I think about that one, actually it's a few lines, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. For some reason, 5 years ago, that just kept playing in my mind. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And what I began to understand was my mission on earth had something to do with kingdom business, had something to do with making our world a better place, had something to do with helping people. And so as I began to go back further and further and deeper, what I realized was I was more than just skin and a body, but that there was something powerful in me and you and all of us, and that we all have a major gift and a major part to play in the kingdom, that we are power players in the kingdom. And as I began to realize that and go even deeper, I started to see who I was, even on the level of, you know, we're all energy, right? We think about sometimes ourselves as people and as a personality, but when you go all the way back to you can't go anymore, what you find is that we are energy, that we are really powerful forces walking around in a body. And until we understand that we are, and until we begin to utilize that power, we're never going to wake up to why we're here. So as I began to go back deeper and deeper and deeper, I really began to not only unlock my own queen code, but I also began to start a movement. I began to really craft this movement around helping other queens to wake up to who they are, helping other queens to go back and claim something that they've forgotten. You know, the purpose of the Queen Code really is to wake up sleeping agents. It really is to let you know that you're bigger, that this whole situation is so much bigger than we really understand. And it's now time to wake up to that. This is not just about our life and what we have to do on a day-to-day, We have something in us that we're supposed to be giving that's so powerful that it can move the planet. We're not just a body, we're actually a walking force field. Even when you get down to the energetic level, we are literally right now emitting an electromagnetic field. You are, I am, everybody is. But until you really understand that and how to utilize that power, you can't move forward in a very major way. So this is all about awakening to who you are. And as I said, you have to go back, because if you ever want to understand who you are, you have to understand who you were. If you ever want to understand who you are, you have to understand who you were. So Sankofa Queen, go back, get the lessons, get the knowledge, take that with you now and in the future. That's my message for you today. And in the meantime, I do have a wonderful gift for you. If you go to my site at www.thequeencode.com, you can get your free copy of Queen, You Were Born to Succeed. It's a wonderful audio that tells you how you can really begin to make some major steps in your life, and it gives you the blueprint for how you can move forward in 2013 and beyond. So all you simply have to do is go to www.thequeencode.com, and I'll talk to you soon.